Hello and welcome to another episode of Coffee with the Chiropractor. It's your host, Patrick Hogg, and we've got a super special guest today. We are going all the way over to Singapore. So, Shaan is a fellow AECC graduate. He actually graduated a couple of years before me in 2014. He's moved all the way over to Singapore, where he's now actually working in his community to introduce chiropractic into the Singapore community. He's actually working with his own government in order actually to try and get chiropractic more recognized so that people in other countries can actually get the same quality of care as what we're getting over here in the UK. He's got a very specific way of practicing, and I'm going to give him a chance to introduce himself a little bit better and actually tell us a little bit more about the specific way that he practices with his patients. It's Dr. Shaan Rai.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm currently practicing in Singapore. I graduated from ACC in UK, and afterwards I was kind of at a point where I was thinking about going abroad, and I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go. And I started working just outside of London in Essex. And at this point, I kind of started looking at other potential countries. So really, I was actually looking at maybe staying in Europe. So going to maybe Germany, other parts of Scandinavia. So I was looking at jobs, and I actually went out and I met people in Sweden, and went out and met people in Denmark. And then randomly, I was looking still at jobs, potentially if there was other jobs still within England, and one popped up and it said Southeast Asia. So I just thought, sure, I'll apply for it. And at the time, I used to play rugby. So I was on a rugby tour with a friend of mine. We got in the car, we're about to drive home. And as soon as I look at my phone, I realized I had this email saying that I've been offered a job in Jakarta. So I told my friend, who actually was someone I used to work with, and he looked at me and he was like, okay, maybe we should get breakfast, figure out where Jakarta is, and then see from there. But on that day, I kind of made my decision that, something, whether it's from the universe or whatever you want to see it, something's come into my life, and why not take that opportunity, that risk. So then I went off and I was doing my training initially in Singapore, and then I moved to Indonesia afterwards, and I started practicing out there.
Amazing, amazing. So maybe you can tell us a little bit more about why you chose chiropractic, what really kind of instilled you into the chiropractic journey in the first place.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. To be honest, I know some people have this amazing chiropractic story where maybe they had stomach issues, they had immunity issues, or maybe they had a sports injury and they went to a chiropractor and it helped them. To be honest, I knew I wanted to get into healthcare. I knew I wanted to do something that helped people, but I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. So I looked at dentistry, and to be honest, staring at people's mouths all day didn't really seem like it was going to be that appealing. And even when looking at what medical doctors do, I mean, I have a lot of respect for medical doctors still, but a lot of the ones I would see around me at that point looked very tired, and their patients are dying. They're doing a lot of great work, but they're always unfortunately a bit on the losing end sometimes with the patients that they're seeing. And then when I went to do some work experience, I saw a chiropractor, and she was somebody who was happy and healthy, and so all of our patients as well. It kind of just inspired me to go in that direction. So then when I went to chiropractic college, I already had a background of somewhat of biology and chemistry, so it wasn't too much of a stretch for me. But then about the third year in is where I started to realize more about what I was doing, started to get more passionate about it. And that's where I started to spend a lot more time really working on my own studies, working on extracurricular stuff, whether it's learning new techniques or new philosophy. Even with some of my other colleagues, we went to the WHO so we could try and talk about improving research within chiropractic to make sure, of course, chiropractic is seen a lot more scientifically than it is now. And then it kind of it's gone from there. Even now, I'm still in my green books and my other books as well when it comes to chiropractic. So it's something that hasn't kind of just started like I had this amazing thing and it's fizzled down. It's kind of gone the opposite direction where it's just gone up exponentially, and it's something I've become extremely passionate about.
It's really interesting. And just so you're aware, I actually spoke to a chiropractor from South Africa, and they don't actually know what the green books are. In chiropractic school, by the way, not just like a random person. So maybe you could just explain a little bit more about what the green books are, and maybe how that's kind of molded your journey in chiropractic.
So chiropractic was founded by D.D. Palmer, and his son BJ Palmer was the one who, of course, was really more of the molder for what we see as chiropractic now. He's the one that really wrote a lot more of these green books, as I mentioned, and he's the one that really helped to make the foundations of philosophy, as well as all the other things he did in terms of research, funding, starting it's like radio shows and radio channels and lots of other things that he was doing to really make sure that chiropractic would get as far as it can. And for a lot of people, this would be the base foundation of all of chiropractic books. Personally, I would say that to some extent, you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt. If something's written in the 1920s or 30s, things will change from then. It doesn't mean necessarily they were wrong at the time. It just means that things have progressed and things have changed. So since then, we've had a number of other authors, such as Sinnott, such as Strauss. They've really produced works which are much more relatable to now, and to be frank, much easier to read than reading through BJ's work. Like if you read, like say, volume 18, it's about 800 pages. And it's one of the easier books to read, and it still takes months to get through, at least for me, because it's not always that easily written. So they're very foundational, and I think they should all be definitely read through and go through. But there has been much more work which has developed since then, like the Blue Books by Strauss. For me personally, that was a big factor that helped to influence me. But there are definitely other authors since then who've made some bigger strides.
I was going to say it's a little bit like Stevenson as well. A lot easier to read with stuff like Stevenson than, say, for example, like say the Green Books, because the English is actually a little bit more modern. So yeah, again, just our principles, the stuff that we're trying to work upon, and actually looking at the power that made the body, that actually can heal the body as well. And we were actually, funny enough, we did a Facebook Live this morning, and we were talking about that power of the body and that self-regulation and that system that actually controls it. And I know Shaan has got a very particular way of adjusting his patients, and he actually uses, it was a Titron, is that correct?
Yeah, so we use Titron for analysis, but the overall technique is, well, if you kind of think of chiropractic, it has these different subsets. So you have, say, your full spine, and for me, I do what's called upper cervical. And from that upper cervical, you have different types of, I wouldn't say just techniques, but whole systems as well. So the one I use personally is from the art of the specific, which is knee chest. But of course, within that, you also have things like Blair, Toggle, AO. You mentioned about Nuka as well. So there's a lot of different ones kind of under that general umbrella.
And this just helps our listeners to obviously understand that chiropractic isn't just that kind of black and white thing that you see on YouTube where someone just cracks a joint and people get better. You know, it's a little bit more complicated than that. And like you say, there's those subsets, and you can even go almost like your GPs and your doctors. Like they may even specialize down into dermatology. And so we've got actually, some really, really interesting here, because he's gone down that specific route of looking at a very specific part of the spinal column and how it actually starts to impact people's health. And we were having a short conversation before we jumped on the call, and you actually only adjust 40 to 50% of your clients that come in?
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah. And so, if he does a check on someone and he uses his measurements and finds that they don't need to be adjusted, they come in, they have the check, and then they go again, which can be quite a far-fetched opinion for a lot of people, because if they're still in, say, for example, pain, or they've got a dysfunction, and you're coming in and your chiropractor's turning around and saying, no, you just need a little bit more time to heal.
I think one of the problems is that a lot of people, especially, I think that's a chiropractic viewpoint to some extent, because we think of it of how we have gone through, say, in our own course, for yourself and I, we've been around chiropractic for 10 years or more. It's easy for us then to kind of get into that mindset. But for your average person, if they come in and they go to a dentist and the dentist says, okay, great, you don't need anything today, they don't go, oh, damn, I wanted you to take a tooth out. They go, fantastic, great. This is what it should be. I'm going to go and I'll see you in 4 months, 6 months, whatever it is. It's the same thing. For your average person, especially if you've never seen a chiropractor, they think this is very normal. They get very happy about the idea of not having to have some sort of adjustment.
It's a crazy world that we live in. Obviously, this kind of world that we live in with instant gratification and more. And actually, it's really refreshing to actually see someone with the approach that sometimes a little bit less is a lot more, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So obviously, Dr. Shaan is, very wellness based. He's obviously looking at the general health of obviously all of his patients. So maybe you could just tell us some of the things that you personally do with either your patients or for yourself in order to try and generally keep yourself healthy and well.
So for myself, I'd say in terms of, my food, exercise, I try to be fairly diligent about everything. I wouldn't say I'm perfect. I will go and have, an occasional fatty meal, or maybe have a beer or something like that with some friends. But generally, I would say in terms of food, I keep quite healthy. I actually probably say maybe 5 or 6 days a week, I end up doing fasting of some sort. It's not because, again, because I was doing it for health benefits. I just realized for years I was already kind of doing it. So if I just add an extra hour on, it's kind of in that critical zone, which everyone's aiming for. Otherwise, yeah, I eat fairly healthy. At home we have like fermented stuff, so whether it's kombucha, kefir, and generally in terms of exercise, I try to make sure I'm doing something, especially now because for us we're on lockdown here. It's a bit different, so we have a lot more time. So I'm doing exercise pretty much every day, and then adding in some stretching as well. For people at home, some of the things they could do, of course, would be, of course, making sure they're eating healthy, making sure they're getting some level of exercise, doing some stretching. If they can, try to do some sort of meditation as well. Meditation can be very helpful, especially if they are going through some levels of stress. They need a way to kind of to mitigate that at the moment. That would be something they could really do. And then really just expanding and their minds in learning, rather than doing something the way you're always technically busy, but doing something where you're actually being productive towards whatever kind of goals you have, or even if it's just something to help other people. Trying to do that maybe rather than watching a lot of Netflix or playing games, even though they can be good as well, that can be very helpful to kind of help keep things a bit sane at the moment. Because I mean, for most people to keep healthy, they could probably list off more things than I have now. They know a bunch of things to do, but we're in a bit of a weird time. We're in a time where people are essentially stuck indoors. People are completely disrupted from their normal lifestyles. So trying to find a way to then deal with that better right now, I think would be one of the most useful.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point you made there. It was actually my business coach that basically said to me, if you look back on this period now, can you genuinely look back on it and say that you were proud of what you did during that 8 to 8 weeks that where you were locked in your house? Can you actually say that you've done something that you could be proud of, or that's been productive for you? So it's really interesting that you just said that. I just want to tiny backtrack a little bit. You mentioned something that people might not know something about, which is your fermented foods that you're using, so the kombucha and the kefir. Can you maybe just briefly explain what you meant by that and what actually that is?
Sure. So fermented foods like, say, kombucha, kefir, kimchi, these are all foods which are going to be increasing the amount of good bacteria, as we would call it, in the body, and it's going to then be very positive for your digestive health and for your gut health. So I mean, to be honest, I actually have literally kombucha in this cup right here. It just happens to be something I picked up on the way out. And when you have these positive bacteria, of course, they're going to have an effect not just on your digestion, but your digestion, it has a massive impact on your immune system as well. So by having that, again, it creates more of a good symbiosis in the body. For me personally, I was actually in Hong Kong visiting some friends at the time. And if you ever go to Hong Kong, you end up eating a lot of fatty foods, going out for drinks. And I came back and I just felt like crap. So I looked into it, because I'd seen stuff about this for a while. So I decided I was going to try and start making my own kombucha, my own kefir. And especially with the kefir, because if you look at the biological availability, it's much better than kombucha. And it has, I think it's something like 30 different types of active good bacteria for us, compared to, say, something like Greek yogurt or natural yogurt, which are very good, which has 2. So by having that, personally, I had this big change in energy. It's something I've had over the past few years as a way to just kind of mediate health and, to keep everything going well.
And that's it's a really interesting point, because actually what we know about the stomach and the colon is that 98% of our serotonin is actually produced by our colons and not actually in our brain. And so actually it's an interesting conversation, because if you've got a happy gut, generally you do, like Shaan has just explained, you do have this kind of boost in your energy, this boost in your feeling, and you're generally going to want to perform better. So there's some really, really nice points that have just come out of that conversation. So just thank you for sharing that with us. So look, we're aware that we've got a lot of different people listening on this podcast. So we've got some chiropractors, we've got some patients that are listening to this. Goes out to all of my patients in my clinic. And so maybe there are some like tips and hints that you could give someone so that they could take some immediate action in order to actually help improve on their life, their health, in a way that you feel would support someone's chiropractic care.
Okay, so in terms of supporting chiropractic care, of course, chiropractic and subluxation can be triggered by 3 main things, which would be the different types of stresses. These would be your traumas, your toxins, and of course your thoughts. So to address those 3 things would be the main parts of it. So I won't go too much into toxins, because most people already know how to eat healthy. They may not always do it, but most people already have a good idea of the things they should be doing, such as vegetables and eating organic foods. The 2 I want to touch more on then instead will be more about the thoughts and more about the traumas. Now, you can't really change some of the traumas, but some of the things you can do at home would be to kind of counteract that. So whether you are somebody who's in chiropractic care or who's not in chiropractic care, or even somebody who at the moment is taking a bit of a pause. Say for us, our patient's taking 2 months off of care because they can't come in. So what I've done, say for them, is like giving them exercises and certain types of stretches that they can do from home. For me, of course, I'm focused on the upper cervical. So I would always say starting with the neck, starting to make sure that you have healthy functioning of the neck, because this is essentially a gateway between the brain and the body. Doesn't matter what's happening in your legs, if things aren't getting through here, nothing's going to happen. So making sure that that natural curve, if possible, is good. Again, it's not saying that everyone has to have this curve, that everyone has to have this perfect idea of a spine, but really trying to do anything we can to really push that back more towards the normal. So one thing people can do is if you're taking, like, say, a plastic bottle, putting a towel around it, lying on the floor at home, putting it underneath the neck, and just letting that passively have a light stretch in the neck. Again, it shouldn't be uncomfortable. It shouldn't be aggressive. It's just letting that naturally happen. And then as well, trying to do some stretches out, especially for someone's upper back, because most people, whether they're at home relaxing or they're at home working, they're probably going to be sitting for a lot more time. And as they sit, they start to slouch, and it's going to start to affect them overall. So trying those two moves, I'd say usually the best start, and then kind of working your way down the body, including stretching the shoulders, definitely stretching through the chest. And if you are sitting a lot, trying to really stretch through the lower body. So I wouldn't suggest much about, at least personally, I wouldn't suggest much about stretching the low back, but stretching through the fronts of your legs, the backs of your legs, and the glutes, all of those areas, holding for around 2 minutes each, will be much more beneficial. So that kind of covers the trauma side of it. And that's something that most people can do alongside their chiropractic care to make sure things are holding as long as they can. And then it would be the thought side of it. So things like, say, either dealing with stresses that they have, trying something like meditation, even just finding other ways that will help them and they find are good for understanding maybe the problems they're having or the stresses they're having, can make things much, much easier. One thing that's easier for everyone is to have some sense of purpose. And part of that comes through being able to deal with the other problems you have. So if you're able to then find that sense of purpose, even say now when people maybe have big restrictions on their lives, and also being able to find the other ways that you can deal best with stress right now, that will be the most beneficial. Really taking care of those two factors will be the best. So for me, I would say, yeah, daily exercise, trying to get some sort of stretching or some sort of movement of the body. And of course, doing something like meditation can be very, very
I really love some of the points you just made there, and I just want to backtrack actually, just like a couple of points ago to what something you just made, and that's the sense of purpose. And I really feel just having this conversation for the last 20 minutes or so, that I can actually really feel a very strong sense of purpose, and I'm sure the listeners can actually hear this too. There's a strong sense of purpose in Shaan. He didn't have to jump onto this podcast. He's chosen to jump onto this podcast with me. He doesn't have, and by the way, the reason why I chose Shaan as a guest on our show is that I see a lot of Shaan's stuff on social media. I obviously studied with Shaan, so I knew Shaan before, but I see a lot of his stuff on social media, and I agree with a lot of his principles. I agree with a lot of the stuff that he's trying to do. But there's some stuff that I've learned about Shaan today, about stuff like trying to get chiropractic regulated in Singapore. And, these really strong purposes really drive people. And there's some really good examples. People like Nelson Mandela. His drive, his purpose was what got him. He always put that through, is that was what got him through prison. So maybe you could just explain like why that has such a strong impact in someone's mental or social well-being.
like I said, first of all, I'm very privileged in a sense that I do have a sense of purpose. I know for some people they may not have it, and it's not to their detriment at all. It's just that sometimes in some extent, you're kind of lucky enough if you fall into it. I was lucky enough that I fell into a profession which made a lot of sense to me at the time, and it's made more and more sense as the years have gone along. And I've also, partly because I went abroad, I've been able to meet and encounter other people who've had a much bigger impact than on that change. Like, by not just, again, the way I do certain things, but also by even the technique and everything else that I've been working with. So I'm very fortunate to have that. But I would say because it kind of it takes away some of the questions you have in the back of your head. Like some of the questions of why am I getting up in the morning? If you have that very simple part of this is why I'm doing it, it makes it much easier. It's like, I think, what's the famous saying? It's, if you have a why, then all the hows are easier. And it's the same kind of thing. If you have a clear direction, it's much, much easier to know what your general goals are. You'll figure out all the parts on the way. But if you don't have a direction, it's very hard to figure out what your next step is. I'm not planning to walk up the stairs. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. And for me, again, it was very clear that I wanted to have that direction of making a bigger impact for my community and doing that through chiropractic. So then all the other things, like say working on legislation or working on videos or even doing stuff like this, it just makes sense. It's all part of it. It's just it's different aspects, but you have to have that end goal overall.
It's the how. I really like that. Look, I think that's just a really beautiful way to live your life, and like you say, it just gives you that sense of purpose, and it gives you that that mental clarity of really what it was that you were brought onto this planet to do. And I think that's beautiful. And again, hopefully, people listening to this may actually slap them in the face and make them think, what is their purpose? Because I think Philip McKinnon, he talked about this a lot in his book, Rich on Paper, Poor in Life, about he had multiple people that he was coaching who their next target was to hit £6 million, £7 million, £8 million. And the only reason that they were setting those targets for themselves is because that's what all of their colleagues were doing. That's not what their purpose actually was. And actually a lot of them ended up taking the pay cuts to actually fulfill their life. And I think that's a really beautiful way to actually look at your life. It's not necessarily about what you make or what you earn, because again, you can look at some really selfless people like Gandhi. He never made anything, but he had that sense of purpose, and that's what got him out of bed every day in the morning. So I really
think like money is not a thing. Money is an energy form. That's all it is. It's nothing better really than bags of potatoes, but it's how you use it and what you're using it for. If you use it to things that make you happy, that's fine. But if you can use it for something even bigger, that's much more worthwhile. There has to be some level of service in there. If there's not, to be honest, then we're not completely selfish beings. We can act like it sometimes, but I don't think we
are. No, most of us. So I've learned some absolutely huge gems off of you today. I wanted to just give you a chance to maybe answer this question, which is, if you could go back to Shaan when you were at the AZC and tell him one thing that maybe would have changed your way of looking at your future, what would you go back and tell Shaan?
Probably wouldn't tell him anything. If I did anything, I would change where I am now. And I'm very happy to be where I am now, despite the current crisis. The only thing I would say as advice, I would say go to bed earlier. That's about it. That's all I really say. There's a lot of hours wasted that could be doing something in the morning, whether it's for your general enjoyment or towards your goals. That's all I would, at least for me personally, that's all I change. I'm not a morning person, but otherwise, there's nothing I'd really tell him to do.
That's amazing. Look, and that's yeah, no, look, and that, do you know what that to me basically says? That someone basically hit all their targets, and they're living their purpose. And if that's what you're doing, then you wouldn't want to change anything. And you have to make mistakes.
No,
you have to make mistakes.
Yeah,
people have to make mistakes, because if you never made a mistake, you would never learn.
Oh, I've made a bunch.
Cool. Look, I've really enjoyed talking with you. I'm sure there'll be people out there that have really enjoyed listening to some of the information that you've given. Maybe people want to learn a little bit more about your techniques, or maybe people just want to reach out to you and touch base and maybe learn a little bit more about you. Maybe you could tell people a little bit more about how they could do that if they wanted to reach out for you.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of either websites, our Instagram page, our YouTube, or of course Facebook, it can either be found at Dr. Shaan Rai or at Vitality Chiropractic Centers. So all the information I have would be on there, including videos and including explanations of what I do. In terms of the technique that I personally use, I would then say to talk with the Art of the Specific. So that's led by Sean Dill and Lacey Book. They're husband and wife, and they're great teachers. They really go through in depth a lot about the neurology, explaining more about the philosophy from a very scientific base, to be honest, with a lot of research behind it, as well as philosophically how you can then help some of the sickest people within your community. So I'd say they'd be a good place to start. And if you are interested in what we're doing in terms of our association, the Alliance of Chiropractic in Singapore is the name of our association, which we have here, which is currently the biggest association in the country.
That's amazing. So look, Dr. Shaan, I am aware that you're probably a very busy man like the rest of us, and that you've probably got plenty of things to be getting on with, especially during this crisis and lockdown. However, I just wanted to give you one last chance for you to part us with some words of wisdom. So maybe you've got like a quote or something that you kind of repeat to yourself every day that kind of keeps you going, that maybe you want to share with our listeners.
It's actually something, I'll be honest, I kind of stole from a mentor of mine, but I think it really fuels it quite well. It would be, I'm trying to think of the exact wording he would use. Have a conviction stronger than your desire to please. So in terms of where you treat your patients, the way you treat other people, if you're doing something that's of value, make sure that you're doing it for that reason, not because you think someone else will like it. Make sure it's always for that particular reason.
Amazing. Hey guys, hopefully you've learned something. I've learned tons of stuff today. Look, it's been so nice to have you on the show. Is there anything else that you really
Thanks for having
want
me.
to? My pleasure, my pleasure. Is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners? Anything that you feel like we really should finish off with today?
Hopefully people will make it out of this really well. I would say for any chiropractors out there, if they are interested in upper cervical, I'm always open to answering questions. And if any of them actually do want to go into this line, I will be looking to hire hopefully later this year. So there's always the potential that they can get more into this as well.
Look at that. There you go. Free advertising. Dr. Shaan, thank you so much for coming on to the show with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure. I want to just say thank you to all of our listeners. This is another episode of Coffee with the Chiropractor with your host, Patrick Hogg, and we will speak to you guys again very soon.